So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our NADIOSA webinar. This is our first NADIOSA webinar for 2022, and we're very excited to have Dr. Mario Landman here with us to presenting this afternoon. Welcome very much to our webinar, wherever you're from, you're joining us. We're in the chat. If you're not so familiar with Zoom, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little chat box, as well as later on when we get to discussion, a raise hand function for you to be able to raise your hand. But we're just getting people introduce themselves into the chat box just by sharing your name, your institution or educational institution or university or college, and which city or town you're in. And thank you for joining us this afternoon. So before I hand over to Dr. Landman, I'd just like to introduce him briefly by saying he's currently the Dean of Design at the at the Da Vinci Institute of Technology Management. He's worked in the higher education space for the past 15 years and experience in both design as well as in academic management. Really excited to have him here with us this afternoon because Dr. Landman was one of our speakers at our annual NADIOSA virtual conference in I think it was in May earlier this year, and he gave a really great presentation about engaging design and using the principles of user experience to support us creating meaningful and contextually relevant online learning. We thought we'd share that wider in today's webinar. So I invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy with us today's presentation. Dr. Landman will be presenting, and in between we'll have a bit of time for discussion and chat. So if you want to post anything in the chat, please feel free to do so. Thank you, Dr. Landman, over to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm greatly appreciative. Looking forward to a good engagement this afternoon. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about, that I'm very excited about. It's a topic that has gained a lot of traction recently with the publication of a QAF, and we're going to talk about that a little later, because the words that or the jargon that we've developed around this concept over the last couple of years, things like student experience management, we are now seeing filtering through regulatory documentation. So there is really a good movement in this space, and it is affirming what we've believed and advocated for many years now around what are the most efficient ways of designing any system, any education system, any delivery mechanism to make sure that students have the most engaging experience possible. Right, so maybe just a little bit of feedback around where this whole idea came from. It actually came from a NADIOSA conference back in 2013. So there was a session with a visiting professor from the US called Dr. And now the name is, his first name escapes me, but his surname is Ice, interestingly enough. So Dr. Ice was demonstrating a system that they were using. And it's a magical system. So what it does is that throughout all the different touch points of a student with a system, so whether a student is visiting the library, whether a student is logging onto Moodle, whether a student is not participating in a class, on a daily basis, it would consolidate a report, and that report would then be used by student support agents to contact the students. And they had a rating system. They would flag these early identifiers of disengagement using a robot system, a red, amber, green. And on a daily basis, they would contact these students, and the result of this sort of proactive identification of these flags and intervening and getting the right people to intervene, so the entire institution had a responsibility to intervene if there is something within their space that was triggered, just had fantastic results. So their throughput was through the roof, their student engagement was through the roof, they had so much data to work with to customize the entire delivery methodology, and it was just success and smiles all over the place. And when we contacted him, because at the time I was working for a large private higher education distance institution, and we were very interested to apply his system in South Africa, and they were very reluctant to do so because it was a proprietary system. but the principal idea that you actually have all of these data points available to you, and that you could somehow identify early signs of disengagement and respond to it, stuck. So we went ahead and tried to apply this in a very sort of rudimentary way. And at the time, there was a need. We desperately had to up the throughput of a cohort of open distance learning students. They were funded students. The funding was attached to a certain performance. We had students that was in the system for 8 years and over, thousands of students that were not participating. So it came at that time, and we were experimenting with ways to up their engagement, up their performance, and therefore up the throughput to ensure at that time that the funding remains in place. So there was a strong financial motivator, but it allowed us to toy with these ideas, to really sit down and think, well, what do we know about the student experience? What are the things that are outside of the academic realm that was giving rise to disengagement? So why were students participating in a 3-year degree? Why were they in the system for 8 years? Why are they being inactive and active on and off? What is it that was allowing them or prompting them to disengage? And how could we identify these early signs of disengagement? So at the time, again, very rudimentary, we looked at things like if it was important for them to download an assignment from Moodle, how many of them were logging onto Moodle on a monthly basis. So that was one very small way of looking at engagement. They had to make use of EBSCOs to download resource materials. How many of them were downloading resource materials from EBSCOs, tracking individuals and seeing how often they went onto EBSCOs. So the idea then grew from there, and we became more sophisticated. And as I moved from company to company, and my wife built a consultancy around the concept, we became far more sophisticated in the identifiers, the flags that we could draw out of data, the systems that we were putting into place, CRM systems, LMS systems, eLMS systems, that will allow us to get a better sense of what is happening in the holistic student experience, not just what is happening in class. Because before then, what we were doing is we were looking at assessment performance. So assessment performance only tells you when the pawpaw has effectively hit the fan, not before then. So we wanted to get involved. We wanted to put measures in place long before we get to that point to ensure that the pawpaw does not hit the fan, that we don't get to a point where the student failed, disengages, defers. We wanted to make sure that the student is actively monitored, and we wanted to have a more holistic picture, not only of academic engagement, but also non-academic engagement. So as we were toying with these ideas and we were experimenting, we had fantastic successes. From a sort of a financial perspective, specifically in private higher education, we were able to make the delivery offering more efficient. We were able to save costs that were spent on trying to retain students, trying to prompt students to progress, boost the sessions. A whole lot of money was spent because we were able to keep students engaged for longer because we had a better sense of what was causing them to disengage in the first place. So that led us to UX. So UX is not a new concept. User experience design has been around since the late 80s. It really came into its own around the early 2000s with the start of the Interaction Foundation. Apologies for the lack of words there. And it really has been formalized into a science. But for some reason, UX design and educational design just didn't really cross paths until we had an idea that if we could look at the experience, we could use that information, that data collected from the experience, and apply that to education design. And the methodology is not important. It could be applied to any methodology. So whether it's residential, I just happen to work in the online distance education space, and we could take what we've learned and apply it to online distance education design. So what is UX and what can we learn from it? So first of all, at its heart, the foundation of UX is a series of design and management principles that are used to ensure the provision of meaningful and contextually relevant experiences. So the place where UX was primarily applied was in interaction design. So it comes from web design originally, applied to product design. So if you think of a cell phone or a website or any technology that we currently use, it is very much subjected to UX principles of analyzing what the user experience is. So in the fourth industrial revolution, as we're moving into the fifth industrial revolution, the user experience becomes more important. The fourth industrial revolution was characterized by rapid technological growth, but that technological growth was not always tied to the user experience. So it was growth for the sense of growing, evolving for the sense of evolving, not really tying the technological advancement to the human need. Now, as we're sort of ushering in the very first 30 stages of the fifth industrial revolution, we are learning from UX that the user experience, the actual real world experience, is what needs to inform design, is what needs to inform technological advancements and the rest of it. So it's not just about creating the best product available. It's about providing a product that is meaningful and contextually relevant. Now, in the online distance education space, we are absolutely flooded with technologies. There is so much available. Everything is bright and shiny and fantastic and just looks great and just promises a fantastically engaging experience. But as you test these technologies, and over the last 2 years, we've tested a lot of technologies with our faculty. If it sort of passes that initial focus group stage, we would roll it out to a cohort, and from a cohort, we would roll it out to a qualification. From a qualification, we might roll it out to several qualifications, but it very rarely reaches that stage because the experience is so poor. So, for instance, one of the things that we felt was fantastic was in MS Teams, they rolled out a plugin called Reflect. And what Reflect does is that for every online engagement, the lecturer could post a little survey that tests the mood in the room. And we thought this was fantastic. It was just the coolest thing in the world, a very simple interface. You would select a smiley face or a frowny face or an indifferent face. And in the background, it would track the mood of the student. And while this sounds fantastic because it gives us insight into the level of engagement and the energy, we found that there was nothing really to do with that information. So you couldn't really adjust your presentation, or you couldn't really adjust the courseware you make available based on the mood of the student. So there were many things like this, all kinds of iterations of whiteboards and all kinds of plugins for chats and emoticons, everything promising a fantastic experience. But because we didn't fully understand what the user need was, as we were moving into the COVID lockdown phase, everything was 100% online. We didn't have a very clear sense at that time what the real user need was. So therefore, we were flooding the design, the offering to the student with things that were not really relevant to them and did not contribute to a contextually relevant and meaningful experience. UX is not something that you apply at the end. It is not something that you use to shift your design or to adjust your design. It really has to be something that you think of right from the very beginning. So while we were previously only concerned about issues of pedagogy or andragogy, depending on what the demographic looked like, UX tells us that we should, in addition to the academic considerations, think of the user experience right from the ideation. So right when you set up a system, set up a qualification, set up a delivery methodology, design an experience, it has to be present right from the get-go. So from ideation, conceptualization, the initial design, prototyping, user testing, and then product release. So constantly monitoring the user experience or keeping in mind the user experience, whatever data you have available on the user experience, using that to inform all of the different steps of your design from ideation to product release is absolutely critical. That does not mean that if you've got an existing system that has been running for many years, that you can't use the UX design principles to improve on it. What I'm saying is it is really beneficial if you want to see the maximum benefit of it. It really is important to try and apply it right from the beginning. So the aim then is to produce the best quality academic product. So when we talk about the academic product, we are not just talking about courseware, what you put on your LMS. We are talking about the layout of your LMS. We are talking about the ratio of synchronous versus asynchronous engagement. We are talking about the type of courseware interfaces that you provide. And all of these things are unique to each institution because the users, the demographic, the primary demographics would shift from one institution to the other. So often I'm asked to consult an institution, say, well, we saw this thing that you didn't articulate, or we saw this methodology that you applied into a live session. We would like to do that as well. And then they come back to me and say, well, you know, that didn't really work for us. It's because they trying to plug something into an existing system without really analyzing or understanding what the need and the user experience is. So the academic product that you are developing encompasses all of those different facets. And as we'll discuss in a moment, also includes components that are non-academic of nature. So how are you providing financial support? What type of financial support are you providing? Are you providing student support? How are students accessing that student support? So when we're talking about the best quality product, we're not just talking about the qualification, the curriculum, the content that goes in there. We are talking about the holistic offering, the entire experience. And that experience, the product as a whole, has to be relevant, functional, and very accurately informed by the user's actual experiences. So this brings us to a point where I just want to open a discussion for a couple of minutes. So, sorry, no, before we get there, sorry, I'm preempting it a little bit. So let's just include this particular point and I'll move into that. So what is it that UX teaches us? So what is the big mind shift that we have to undergo? So like I said, normally in education design, we are preoccupied with elements of design that are informed by pedagogy, andragogy, whatever your particular slant or flavor is. But we are looking at the student from a purely academic perspective, while the student is interfacing with our system. And that is not given sufficient consideration. So the student is now viewed as a user. So to sort of explain what this is. So previously, it was like giving someone a textbook about cell phone design, right? As opposed to giving someone a cell phone. So it's that shift that needs to happen. It is the student is a user in addition to a student. And in the online distance education space, the student is all the sort of overarching, or the bulk of the student's engagement is with your systems as opposed to with your content. So I would almost venture to say, and maybe it's a little controversial, that the primary data that you would need to look at to inform online education design comes more out of the user space than it comes out of the academic space. Because if you don't have that access to the platform, to the experience, students are not going to engage with the content. So it's almost a catch-22 situation. So the big switch that we need to flick is to understand that in addition to be an academic animal, the student is also a user in the technological sense of the word. So we need to shift from learning content to learning engagement. And what we've also learned out of the last 2 years in COVID is that when we went through rapid digitization strategies and everybody went through the sort of same evolution, institutions that had a large residential component, a synchronous workshop type of component, as we had historically, or students that were in the residential space and had to move into the online space, they found very quickly that it was not just a case of taking what they had and putting it online. They quickly found that there was disengagement. They quickly found that you couldn't keep students in Teams calls for 8 hours at a time. They quickly found that students were shying away and all kinds of disengagement happened. The positive thing that came out of that was that we learned a lot more about the strategies that would keep students engaged in an online learning environment. But the essence there is that digitization was not just a reformatting, but it was also a translation of. So many institutions then, after they've had a pummeling in the emergency remote teaching phase of the initial lockdown. And what was interesting was at the OEB conference at the end of 2020, the big e-learning conference held out of Belgium, they had reports from all over the world that everybody was going through exactly the same experience. They had the emergency remote teaching, so they had the technologies available and they tried to do what they were doing in class online, and it just simply failed. And then they realized that there was more available, more tools available. But, you know, said with a chuckle, the distance education fraternity already took notice of and saw the value of. But residential universities and institutions quickly had to learn how to use these tools to break up the experience. So if you take a face-to-face classroom experience as a classical gold standard for student engagement, what institutions had to do was they had to look at that engagement and deconstruct it. So what were you left with? You were left with a lecturer standing in front of a class. He or she is writing on a board. Students are sitting at desks. They've got notes available to them, maybe some technology, a study guide, etc., textbooks. So if you break that down even further, what you were left with was content and meta content. So content being the actual learning content that you need to get into the heads of students, but then all of the social components, the noise that happens in that classroom, that is the guidance in regard to the content. So we are constantly trying, now that we understand that there's these two elements, the content and the meta content, we are finding ways to translate that into the online space as opposed to simply trying to digitize it. So it might mean that you are no longer providing students with study guides. You are now providing them with tutorial notes, and you are providing them with media, and you're providing them with screencasts to try and capture all of those elements in an online format. But it's simply not a case of for reformatting it. It is a case of translating or retranslating it. So also something that came out of this that we realized was we are actually flooded with data that we are not using. The student is constantly revealing their experience to us. So if you've got an LMS system like a Moodle or a Blackboard, their participation on that system is very, very accurately recorded. How long they spend on an item, how quickly they progress through items. We use software like heat mapping that shows us which areas of a particular course page students frequent. So if you've got a course page and you've got nice multimedia on there and you've got interactive activities and all kinds of great resources, but if you switch the heat map on and you see that students are simply logging on for short periods, downloading a guide or downloading an assessment brief and then logging off, then your design has failed. You need to find out why that is. So students are constantly revealing their experience, whether it's on an LMS, whether it's through assessment data, participation data, visiting the library, logging onto digital resources. They are constantly revealing their experience, and it is our task to tap into that and process that information so that we have usable data that can inform the design. The challenge about our area is that while the data is abundant, data management and analysis is challenging. We recently had a conversation where we were showing a client how much data is available out of Moodle. And what was interesting was that when we were trying to package this into a monthly report, it became incredibly challenging because you had to go and write a little report that Peter did not attend class. Peter logged onto Moodle only once in the last month. And it was challenging to try and translate everything that Moodle was recording into a usable set of data that we could respond to. There's a QA. Let's just see what it says here from Zetsi. Sorry. Found the concepts engagement and translation interesting and correspondingly noticed this aligns with holistic. However, from my perspective, which is possibly different, data and factors do not align. Does not possibly require a different approach? Is it about user and experience, but supposedly subjective experience? What am I understanding it wrong? No, it is absolutely holistic. So it's not just purely basing your design on user experience. User experience, I think, is more relevant in the selection of technologies and how we put things together. But the principle here is that we continuously need to evaluate how the student responds to it. And the response is not just better engagement. The response is also better performance, better throughput, better attendance. So I'll share this with you in a moment, but each institution's metrics are going to be very, very different. Design changes must be validated by data. So while experimentation is absolutely encouraged, I would warn against experimenting on a large scale. So we follow a typical technology implementation strategy where we would do research about a particular technology. We would test it with a group of faculty, individual classes, maybe with individual students before it's rolled out to a group or a cohort or a qualification. But any changes, any shifts beyond that has to be informed and validated by data. So it's not when you're in the sort of production or release phase, it is not advisable to keep changing designs if it's not substantially substantiated by data on user experience. And then, as I've said previously, the ultimate sort of learning that we take out of applying the principles of UX design is that in addition to the student being an academic animal or an academic being, non-academic factors equally influence their engagement and their successful participation in a qualification. Right, so that brings me to my discussion point. All right, if we could get a few hands and a few comments, I want to spend about, if we could spend maybe 5-7 minutes here talking about in your current institutions where you are currently are, how many facets of the student experience are you tracking? There's no shame in saying that our only interest is in assessment data. I think historically most institutions would focus primarily on assessment data, throughput data, module performance, program performance. All of those are great. They're sort of classical elements of a quality management system. But I would just like to get a sense before we go further, what is it that you are tracking in your institution? Great, now you need to help me. I'm not sure how participants, I suppose we can put up their hands.
Yeah, there's, thanks. There's a thing to put up your hands if at the bottom of your Zoom screen to just click raise your hand, and then we can allow you to come in and you can talk. Or what you can do is you can type capital M into the chat, and then I'll pick that up as well, that you want to come in and talk.
Okay, so anybody would like to start us off? Let's see from anybody? Yes, raise a hand. Let's see, sorry. Barima, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Perfectly.
Okay. Well, yeah. What I can maybe say, I'm not sure how much I can say, but yeah, the institution for where I'm currently working at, we are Our LMS, if I can put it that way, is quite a system that actually tracks quite a bit of things. We do track assessment. I think that's the most common type of tracking an institution in academic institution would look at. But we actually track quite a lot of things like queries of students, for example, the number of queries of students. We look at also the financial aspects in terms of, how often students then engage or when students make a payment on fees and all of that. It's all also monitored. So it's basically finance, admin, and then assessment, if I can put it into categories.
So can I ask you, are these data sets, are they centrally evaluated or do they go to different places in your organization and different people respond to them? How are you managing? Because you've got, what you're referring to there are good elements of the student experience. And a very sort of a key element that is overlooked is finances. So in our experience, a student worrying about making payments or is being harassed to make payments is going to be a student that is going to disengage. So how do you react to that? Understanding that there's a financial issue, maybe sending him a bursary application, showing him the way to apply for alternative funding mechanisms and credit facilities, or simply suggesting that the course load is reduced. So financial stress, if I can put it that simply, has a direct impact on student engagement and is often overlooked in this whole evaluation. So thank you for that, Burima. Anybody else? Anybody else now that Burima got us started and broke the ice? Anybody else who just wants to give us a sense of whether they are evaluating anything or monitoring or tracking anything beyond just assessment performance, module performance, program performance? Is there anybody that feels that they go a bit beyond that? Carissa, please go ahead.
Hi, good day. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Okay, so I think something that I'm from Stadio in Bellville, and I think something that we are really, really good at tracking is attendance and at-risk students. But there's something that you did mention that I think will be amazing for us, and that's the heat mapping, because we do have an LMS system that the students are supposed to use on a daily basis, but they don't. So I think if we get something like that, just to see where the students go off, where they go missing, I think that will be great. Because like I said, we do track at risk in attendance and things like that, but we do also need a way to check the students' progress. So I think that's something that we're really good at, but also heat mapping in terms of our LMS system is something that we really need.
Carissa, which LMS do you use?
Oh, we use Canvas.
Canvas, okay, well, Canvas has very similar functionality to Moodle. So if you don't have a heat mapping facility, that's an additional add-on. And the heat mapping facility is more to see where students end up on a particular page. So if you've got a course page, for instance, Introduction to Business Management, and students are not scrolling past the midway of the page, then it doesn't make sense to put your hard-hitting resources at the bottom of the page. So it's a nice design, but what you would already have as part of the vanilla package is very detailed reporting on how long students spend on a page and what they actually click on and access. So that facility would already be available to you.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. I'll mention it to everyone, and then we'll just have a look at it, because we're also in the progress of creating new study guides, and they're going to link up with Canvas. So I think in terms of how much data you put in and how easy it is to link the study guide with the Canvas is super important in terms of user experience.
Yeah. What you just going to have to decide on as an institution is that once you open that particular can of worms, and you see how much data is available to you.
That's the problem.
What is it that you respond to? What is it that you don't respond to? How do you process it, package it? And you might find that it is just simply too much.
Yes.
So I'm going to show you how to sort of simplify it later on in this presentation, but those are the big decisions that you need to make the moment you decide to take the leap into this direction. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. Let's move right along. Okay, just as a sidebar, why is this discussion so relevant now? Because like I said, we were talking about student experience management back in 2009 already, but it's only now that the sort of the language of student experience management, meaning looking at the student as both an academic and non-academic being, looking at the holistic student, all of the different elements of the student life cycle, and then responding to those. So if you look at the new QAF document, they start to use language like the development of a robust or mature QMS with a focus on self-regulation, self-correction, and development. So how do you self-regulate and self-correct if you don't have a keen eye on what the data about the experience is telling you? So data management, identifying channels for data, processing, interpreting, processing, and analyzing the data, and then using that data to correct the system is absolutely the flavor, the current flavor in regard to quality management in the South African regulatory system. Ensure all institutional functions are represented. So again, we only looked at the student from an academic perspective. The shift now in regard to the QAF is very clear that we need to look at all of the institutional functions, because all of the institutional functions directly or indirectly impact the student experience and therefore results in disengagement or performance issues. So when we make decisions about quality, when we make decisions about design, are we able to demonstrate a workflow across all levels and all departments? That's why I asked the question about finances. So if a student tells a teacher, I can't pay my studies, where does the teacher take that information? Or does the teacher say, well, sorry, you can't pay your studies, come back when you can? So is there a workflow that the teacher can channel that information, which is a direct query, it can be captured? Can it be channeled somewhere, whether it's student support or the finance department, or wherever it needs to go in your institution, where someone can contact that student and say, well, you know, why don't you reduce your course load? Or why don't you apply for a bursary? We've got X, Y, and Z available. Or why don't you apply for alternative funding or a credit product? These are the facilities that we can recommend, and we can help you to access those. So that decision-making workflow that ultimately aims to improve the quality of the experience has to be demonstratable across the institution. So another critical learning from UX is that everybody is participating in it, and therefore everybody meaning every department potentially has an impact on the user experience. And then, like I said, everything revolves around data. So the picture we are painting about the student experience is painted in data. Where does that data come from, and what can you do with it? When we speak to emerging institutions, they don't always have a sophisticated LMS or a CRM system, but we can show them how freeware LMSs and freeware CRM systems can dramatically increase their view on the student experience by tracking fundamental data points. So what do you have available to you? And if you are interested in the UX approach, that is my recommendation, is to sit down and find out, what are we looking at? What are we capturing? How can we centralize this data? Also, something that the QAF is hammering hard on is the display and management of data. So are you able to draw these things together to paint a picture of what the students are experiencing in your institution? And then all of this driven by technology and innovation, so strong emphasis on the incorporation of technology. And then whatever system you develop, whatever delivery methodology you develop, is it adaptable and can it grow? And luckily, with the tools we have available to us, the LMS systems, the LMS systems, the sort of synchronous technologies or that facilitate synchronous engagements like Zoom, etc. There is so much there that we can exploit, customize, use, and to grow our offering continuously. Okay. So in focusing specifically on online education, what are the things that we can shift? What are the things that are available to us that we can design around? What are our online education design levers? So what are the things that we can customize, shift, combine, utilize to form a comprehensive user experience that promotes engagement? The first thing and the most obvious thing is courseware design. So asking yourself whether your courseware is specifically designed for its application. When we consult with the institutions and we look at their courseware, often it's just paper behind glass. And you ask them, well, this passage is 5 pages long. Could it not be encapsulated better in a screencast? Is it really necessary to have a single study guide? Could you not break this up into individual tutorial notes and enhance it with different media elements, web links, etc.? So making sure that your courseware promotes engagement is absolutely critical. So back in the day when we just started on Moodle and started with LMSs back in 2009, it was good enough to put a PDF on Moodle, create assessment links, maybe a chat or a forum discussion, and that was absolutely sufficient. As students have become far more sophisticated in their engagement with other technologies, they are expecting that same level of interaction in their education products. So therefore, looking at your courseware is a very, very good place to start pulling levers and making those adjustments. Addressing the divide. This is something that became very prevalent during the COVID time. In distance education, that divide just seemed to grow and grow and grow. If you look at the feedback that institutions were given at the OEB conference, for instance, the biggest challenge was students that was disengaging because of the perceived distance they were feeling from their institution and their fellow classmates. So what is it that you can do to enhance the socialization, the experience of belonging to a learning community, the experience of being a student that forms part of an institution? And there are many different ways to do that. Social groups, wikis, group work, syndicate groups. There's a lot that you can do to try and assess that geographical divide. In my experience, the biggest contributor to effective design sat in the faculty space. So when we just started, I did a lot of research. The current institution where I am now, like I said, they had a sort of a dependency on a large residential face-to-face component. And when everything had to move online, we quickly realized that faculty were taking that same toolbox, the talk and chalk toolbox, the Sage on the Stage toolbox into these virtual environments. And it just caused absolute chaos, disengagement, boredom, and just a lot of frustration. So the biggest shift I think you can make is investing in faculty CPD. We created a series of laws for online educators. One of the laws is that you need to embrace the now, meaning that you are a face-to-face facilitator. Now you have to become an e-educator. So you have to educate yourself in the tools, how to use the tools, manipulate the tools, apply the tools in lesson structures. And that I feel has made the biggest difference to us. So courseware is a resource. Addressing the divide is great because you're creating a socialization. But when the tacky hits the tar right at the grassroots, it is about the engagement between the faculty and the student. And if you don't have faculty that have embraced or adopted the e-educator personality, you are going to see a lot of disengagement happening. So putting time and effort into designing a CPD program for lecturers, allowing them to feed their experiences into that program design has made all the difference to us. Communication, students need to understand when they can communicate, where they can access specific information. Simple things like a lecture posting. I can, if you mail me between these hours, I can respond within 24 hours. On Thursday evening, we've got a chat session. On Friday morning, we've got a live engagement via Zoom, a synchronous workshop type of engagement. Was also a critical part of ensuring that students understand what is expected of them and understand what to participate. So early on, we would have lecturers saying, okay, well, now I don't have 50 hours of class time anymore. I now have 8 hours of class time spread over several weeks. And what I'm finding is that students are coming into these classes and they are unprepared. So developing a simple communication strategy like a tutorial note maybe goes out on a weekly basis, and which the lecturer says, I'll see you on Thursday evening. By that time, I'm expecting you to have read this, prepared this, participated in this chat. It made a huge difference in upping the student engagement and making sure that students got real value out of the educational products they were investing in. The TPAC model is as old as the internet and as old as e-education. But it is a model that is completely misunderstood because, and recently we had an experience, a very senior delegate from the Department of Higher Education, one of our postgraduate students was presenting on his research, and it was disheartening to find that the Department of Education has invested millions upon millions in technologies, but these initiatives often flop because there is a lack of adherence to the TPAC model. So you can go research the TPAC model, but essentially what it means is that in your design, in your delivery, the technology, the actual content of a program, and your teaching and learning approach, your pedagogy, has to work in unison to provide that central space. You are trying to bring the technology, the andragogy or pedagogy, whatever your approach is, and the learning content together into a overlapping, integrated, synthesized space. So what happens is if you emphasize the technology, but that technology is not incorporated into the curriculum, people won't use that technology. If you don't design your curriculum to incorporate the technology and use correct technologies to communicate a particular piece of content, then the whole thing falls apart as well. So but I don't want to hamper too much on it. It's a very interesting, very simple model, but effectively it means that you constantly have these three poles, these three levers available to you, and you have to use them, move them in unison. You can't introduce a technology without accommodating that technology in your curriculum and making sure that the correct aspects of that technology is used to communicate the correct component or aligned to the correct components of your curriculum. Let me give you one example. So in one of our courses, students are required to do a lot of calculations for a retail management module. And they keep failing the calculation components miserably. Pages of a particular explanation in regard to how these calculations are meant to happen. Students just don't understand it. It is dead information. Then we introduce a technology. We have a lecturer do that same lesson or that same calculation live on a video. Marginal improvement, but it's only when we understood that if you want to really illuminate that and get students to understand that video needs to happen within the factory or the workplace in which this particular calculation happens, to show them that, you take this material and you need to be able to calculate how many t-shirts you can make from that. So just making sure that all these different pieces move together. The last there before we move on is intervention. And it's already been mentioned that we get a lot of data out of the student experience, some of the direct data, and we need to develop suitable interventions in relation. And that's going to bring me to the last bit, which is where I wanted to get to today. Okay. So the non-academic design considerations, the things that we need to keep in mind from a non-academic perspective that informs our design is to create a social sphere, to identify commitment issues in whatever form, creating an understanding of administrative processes. Very interesting that if you show students how to access support, you show students how to access results, etc., it takes a lot of anxiety out of a system, and then also making sure that your whole design is informed by a particular demographic. I'm sorry I'm rushing, but I want to get to the heart of this. So in a general distance education institution, the data channels we have available to us are those that come from the typical internal academic quality assurance data, participation record, assessment data, module performance, etc. But in addition to that, everybody has access to participation records, very good indicator of disengagement. The learning management system, like I said, there is so much that sits behind it in regard to access, time spent, movement in that space. The same with your electronic learning management system, and other words, your administration system, and then the voice of a student as he or she directly communicates to you. Okay, so this translates into a series of long-term or proactive design initiatives, and then short-term design initiatives or reactive design initiatives, which I quickly just want to demonstrate. So if it's important for you that a student accesses Moodle or your LMS, in other words, the critical information needed to meet the outcomes of a particular module sits there. So if that student doesn't access it, it's absolutely a flag that there's something wrong. At other institutions, it's absolutely fine for the student to log on, download a guide, and log off. If they don't spend more time on the LMS, it's not a problem. But in our case, at our institution, it is a problem. So the flag is no LMS login. If that occurs for after a week since the commencement of a module, we might just send the student an SMS explaining, this is how you are meant to log in, this is where you can get your login. If they don't log in for 2 weeks, we might email them, prompting them, informing them how important it is, providing them a link to the LMS, how to reset their password, as well as a screencast tutorial on how to access the system and navigate. If after, there's a mistake there, level 3, the red intervention. If after 3 weeks they don't log in, then there's a direct intervention and they are called. Another simple example, these are very, very simple examples just to illustrate the point, that if students don't participate in synchronous initiatives like live MS Teams sessions, if they don't attend one session, we might send them a reminder by SMS and an email recording of link. 2 sessions, now the student is really being put at risk. We consider it an amber flag. We send them an email reminder, a link to the recording, and a user tutorial. If after 3 sessions they haven't attended, it is a real problem, and we give them a telephone call. So the only thing I wanted to illustrate from this is that you've got data channels available to you. Look at those data channels, analyze the flags. So what is it that constitute risk in the many different activities that students participate in? In your institution, what constitutes a green flag, an amber flag, or a red flag, and design a suitable intervention around it. And that is how we effectively practice the principles of UX in online distance education. Sorry for the lot of information. I was trying to pace myself, but I think that's where I'm going to end it. And I would love to hear just some responses in the few minutes we've prepared. Anybody that wants to make a contribution? Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Landman. Yes, we've got a few minutes left for questions, so please feel free to type those into the chat. Or again, if you just put M in the chat or click raise your hand, we can allow you to unmute. Dr. Landman, we just had a few questions. One question was just you talked about TPACK. Is that the same someone was asking about as TPACK, TPACK?
Yes, it is.
Okay, it is the same. Okay, great. Okay. Yeah.
So it is. There's different versions of it. Some institutions emphasize an andragogical approach. The others emphasize a pedagogical approach. Some refer to knowledge, other refers to content, exactly the same thing. The challenge of TPACK is that no one can claim ownership of it anymore. It is a very, very old model. And it has been applied in different ways. To answer Kylie, the flags come from you. So you need to decide if students don't log in for 2 weeks and you feel that that is a problem to you, but it's not a critical problem at that point, then you need to decide that that is a green flag. To other institutions, if students don't log into Moodle at all, it is not a problem. So each delivery methodology is different, and you would need to decide what constitutes behavior that indicates initial risk, real risk, and just absolutely terrible risk that will result in failure. So those flags, but Moodle does give you so much information to work with. So thank you kindly. I will absolutely share my presentation. I've already done so. Yes, Barina, please go ahead.
Yes, it's a bit of a personal opinion, but I would just like to ask you, like in your educated opinion, which elements do you believe is the most comprehensive in terms of delivering, the different aspects we have been talking about?
Yeah. I will be shocked, but I'm a firm believer in Moodle. It's not that I haven't worked with other systems, but here's the reason I believe in Moodle. The question you need to ask yourself is, do you have the technical capacity within your institution to design reports, to maintain a system like Moodle, and to customize it? If you do have that capacity, go with Moodle. If you don't have that capacity, go with something that works out of the box, that it's got pre-formulated reports that prompts you to do simple updates that you don't need for technical support in-house. So if you do have a technical support, go with Moodle. If you don't, go with something generic like Blackboard, Canva, etc. They all have very similar functionality. What I like about Moodle is that all the reporting is massively customizable, and that allows you to sift through that massive data and create something that is really usable for you. I hope that answers you, Brina.
Yes, it does. It does. Thanks for that.
Any more comments?
It doesn't look like we have any comments, other comments coming in. So I think then I'm going to say thank you very much, Dr. Landman. Thank you very, very much for a great presentation and great engagement and sharing with us. I think giving participants today a great many number of ideas in terms of perhaps rethinking what they thought about user experience design and how we can design for learning. I really like your approach of thinking about student experience very holistically. So thinking not just about the academic experience in terms of the materials, but also thinking about, the other processes, how we communicate with students, things like finances, administration, etc. And then I think something that I'll be taking away from today certainly is thinking about, we collect data. Are we aware of this, the sort of tons of data that our institution is collecting in various ways? And then with that data, are we then doing things with that data? So are we able to do things, or are we just collecting data for collecting it? So thank you very much. I think it's been a very informative and inspiring session. And thank you everyone for participating today. We look forward to hosting you again. I've put into the chat the details of our follow-up, our next webinar, which will be taking place in October around student engagement in higher education, which I think will build very nicely on today's session, where we look at some of the feedback and the reports that have come out of the COVID experience from the perspectives of students. So thanks very much, everybody. It was great that you joined us. Please do join us again next month for the following Nadiosa webinar. Thank you again to Dr. Mario Landman from Da Vinci of being our speaker today. And we wish you all the best and keep safe, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.